Kerballers, by and large, did not have the aerobiotic setup to smoke cigarettes when stressed. Like frogs, most of their air was indicated via the skin. So in order to absorb enough of the chemicals in a cigarette to feel affected by it, they had to create what humans would refer to as a hot box environment. This meant that smoking was considerably less popular for Kerballers than it was for humans, as the pure logistical considerations were a pain. Still, Grand Marcel Yogut had been young once, and she had developed a fondness for smoking via second-hand consumption while on board a human ship. She was no longer the young frog she had once been, and no longer surrounded by humans. But whenever things got stressful and it was her job to take charge, oh, how she envied her younger self. She licked her eyes slowly and deliberately, the Kerballer equivalent of squeezing the bridge of one's nose. As a Grand Marshal, she was responsible for the military presence in an entire solar system, a rather important link in the chain that was the Kerballers' military complex, a link which now, thanks to some foolishness, stood on its own, cut off from the core systems in a move by their enemies, which had been equal parts bold and plainly obvious. The XD were by and large not considered to be good warfighters. Their shock impulse was high, so any significantly damaging blow could easily knock their warriors out for good, much the same as a horse not being able to survive a broken leg. Their bodies resembled round furry balls, which sat upon 4 legs. Underneath their central ball was their mouth and a set of 4 highly flexible manipulator arms. Sitting between their 4 legs, spaced equally around their body, were 4 sets of eyes, for a total of 8. These eyes were rather undeveloped, being able to detect motion but little else, not to mention extremely short-sighted. Instead, they saw, using a bizarre example of echolocation, they had highly sensitive ear-like organs which ran around the outside of their mouth, almost as if they had hole-filled lips. It goes without saying that some humans found the XD's mouths to be utterly horrifying. Their voice box was able to emit a ping, knows while their mouth was eating, drinking, or being otherwise occupied. The position of their best senses, the fragile nature of their arms, and the limited motion of their legs makes hand-to-hand combat extremely unpractical for the XD. It is theorized that if their world had developed any form of predator, then they never would have survived the process of becoming a space-faring civilization. But they did survive, and now that most combat was undertaken via hulking spaceships and mass-produced drones, suddenly combat was becoming a whole lot more viable for them. In short, they had gotten rather uppity recently, and now Kerballers were paying the price. Kerballers weren't much of a warrior species either, at least not when compared to the more violent examples of the galaxy. But they weren't completely without historical combat experience like the XD. Kerballers were short, stocky, green humanoids, so 2 arms, 2 legs, body and head, etc., with large eyes and very long tongues. They used their long tongues to capture food, such as large bugs, right out of the air. Although they can eat wild bugs and the like, they much prefer prepared meals. They can also eat more normal sources of protein just fine, although their digestive system struggles with high-fat diets. However, most find food that doesn't wiggle when you eat it to be rather bland. Kerballers, being amphibious, did mean that they had some disadvantages when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, as their skin was very easily pierced. But as they evolved and took their space amongst galactic powers, they had proven themselves to be solidly second-rate. Considering some of the galactic powers included self-replicating machines specifically designed for war, which had then overthrown their controlling masters, second-rate was nothing to scoff at. All this was, of course, a rather long-winded way of saying that the Kerballers had gotten themselves blindsided by the XD. The XD had launched a 2-pronged attack on Kerballer territory, with the intention to cut off 4 solar systems from the Kerballer core worlds and claim the systems as their own. Why was this so obvious? Because the XD had straight up told Kerballer their attack plan when they had declared war. The Kerballers had then proceeded to make 2 faulty assumptions. Firstly, the Kerballers had overestimated the XD, not believing that they would ever be stupid enough to attack exactly where and when they had said they were going to attack. Who would be dumb enough to give their enemies so much strategic information? Secondly, The Kerbolers had then underestimated the XD, believing that the defenses of the systems in question would be powerful enough to hold off an XD attack until reinforcements had arrived. Now Yogut was paying the price for that arrogance. The XD had Void jump their entire army smack bang into the teeth of the Kerboler defenses, and then proceeded to fight their way through, capturing 2 Kerboler systems before a shocked military apparatus had a chance to respond. Then, instead of resting or even regrouping, the XD pushed forward to their 3rd system, once again jumping straight into the defense's teeth, and once again winning the fight before the Kerboler Republic got so much as a word in. To make matter worse, it was patently obvious that the XD didn't have a clue as to how real warfare went. As soon as they had defeated the defenses at these systems, they just as quickly abandoned them, seemingly under the assumption that the Kerbolers would now consider this territory lost. The XD force, now almost completely exhausted, jumped once more, leaving 3 territories basically abandoned, with only administration ships left behind to start the process of colonizing them. It was here that Yogut's part in the story began. She would go down in history simply because she had taken the threat semi-seriously. Her system was nothing more than a small colony, just barely starting out and not even fully self-sufficient. But she had petitioned her government repeatedly in order to gain a defense network that was at least as robust as the other 3 considerably more developed systems already had. Her stubbornness had paid dividends, and when the almost completely flattened XD force jumped into her system, she had been ready. It was safe to say that the XD forces had a traumatic introduction to the art of warfare, as throwing yourself directly into overlapping railgun fire tends to have that effect. But they had proven victorious at least, their losses balanced by the 3 highly developed systems they had gained. This 4th colony was simply a grand finale, one last battle, against what would no doubt be, and had been before the war was announced, a tiny defense network consisting of a single frigate and 3 corvettes. Instead, the XD were met with the same battle group they had just finished fighting, a battle cruiser, flanked by a pair of destroyers, 3 groups of 4 frigates, 2 groups to escort the destroyers and 1 group to perform deadly hit and run attacks. Filling out the bulk of the fleet, nothing short of 60 corvettes, each ready and willing to take direct hits in order to protect their bigger and much more valuable sisters. Oh, and let's not forget, the original defense force of the colony was still there, a single frigate and 3 corvettes. The fighting was brutal, but the XD simply did not have the ability to continue on. Even with the force Yogut had procured for her system, the XD had the numbers and combat weight necessary to win the battle. What they lacked was the will. Morale had been broken, supplies were running low, ships were fighting while still burning from the previous battles, and the crews on board them were exhausted. The XD had proven that they were a civilization that should be taken seriously when it came to combat. But it was clear how naive their leadership was. It was clear where the failure lay. But just as the battle for Yogut's system was coming to a close, the admiral of the XD received the devastating news. The Kerbolers had refused to acknowledge XD ownership of their systems and had swiftly retaken them. To the Kerbolers, the XD seemed fools. To the XD, the Kerbolers seemed like double-dealing devils. Thus, the siege of Yogut's colony begun. The XD cut off all supplies to Yogut's people and her forces, demanding that the Kerbolers respect the honorable war they had sought to fight. The XD had given them their combat plans, they explained. They had told the Kerbolers of their intentions. Every step of the way, they had earned that territory through the sacrifice of XD's best. There had been a million ways to take the systems they wanted. They could have developed a plague and simply wiped out every Kerboler in the galaxy, they argued. But that had chosen to be honorable, and now Kerboler's diplomats would take all that away. It was around this moment that the galactic community got involved, seeking a peaceful resolution to the conflict, not wanting to unleash a bitter and unhinged XD onto the grand starlit stage, but likewise not wanting to isolate the steadfast support found in the Kerboler Republic. A 3rd species would host peace talks between the Kerbolers and the XD. It would be up to them to education, negotiate, and goad the 2 species into a resolution the Galactic Summit would respect. A tall ask for sure, Both sides had already lost so many lives to the war, one which the XD had started. But the galactic community had an ace up their sleeves, the perfect species to sweet-talk the two alien races back into their peaceful coexistence. Humanity. Oh, wonderful, misguided, bloody, and brutal humanity. New on the intergalactic stage, human represented the ultimate neutral party, as this was likely the first time any human diplomat would have even heard of the two species. As XD in Kerbeler space was basically on the opposite side of a very big galaxy compared to humanity's and its home world. Humanity, the species that had more experience fighting wars than any other, simply because it had spent so much of its history trying to kill itself. A snake eating its own tail, one which had learned from its past conflicts. A species that had grown gentle and understanding and wise. If there was anyone would know how foolish this all was, who had direct examples they could point at in their own history, it was them. But even for the skilled diplomats of humanity, such negotiations took time. Time Yo-Gut didn't have. Her colony hadn't been able to support even itself when they had first been cut off from the Republic, and now she had an entire battle group to feed. The crews of those ships were landing on her world in droves, attempting to rapidly grow what they lacked. But not every soldier could farm. The ships had to stay crewed in case the fighting resumed, and everyone needed to sleep. It simply wasn't enough. What farms weren't failing couldn't produce what she needed given a year, let alone the time she actually had. But if she gave the order to break the blockade, it would be kicking the ultimate hornet's nest. The past few weeks of fighting would be nothing compared to a full-scale war between the two species, potentially even an existential war, putting one or both species in danger of permanent extinction. There was some good news, however. The humans had negotiated a supply convoy, only a single one. The XD wanted to keep the Kerbelers pressured after all, but it would buy her people some time, a month maybe. That's assuming the humans could supply as much as the Kerbeler Republic could. But Kerbelers could only do that if the entire Republic threw their logistical resources into the mix, considering the time that they had been given. Would humans do such a thing? For a species they hadn't even met yet? If she had a month, she could probably be self-sustaining, so long as she was willing to work her people ragged. A brutal month to barely come up with enough calories of bland food for almost 2 million hungry mouths. But if the humans couldn't provide her enough food, a rapid beeping through her from her train of thought. The reason why she was in the command center to begin with had just jumped into the system. The human convoy, the one that could very well determine the fate of two space-faring species, had arrived. And it was fucking massive. Forget equaling a Kerbeler-sized convoy. What Yo-Gut was looking at could have matched, if not beaten, the tonnage of the entire Kerbeler Navy. Her tongue froze on one of her eyes as she read the information the sensors were providing. 600 massive X-shaped ships, each loaded with 100 detachable cargo containers, now filled the void above her world. Each container was roughly the size of an old Earth football field. Humans had put together this in only 2 of their standard months. Yo-Gut felt as though she was looking at the entirety of Kerbeler's shipping for a year. It simply dwarfed anything she could have ever expected. The massive ships dropped off their containers in a geostationary orbit, allowing the Kerbelers to access the supplies as needed. They had also included a manifest that was nothing short of mind-boggling. From cargo shuttles to fireworks, from tractors to seeds, from dense nutritional paste to ice cream, from cars to bolts. Some of the containers could also be deorbited and landed on the planet, whereupon they could act as entire industrial or agricultural facilities, warehouses or factories, mills, bakeries, sawmills, and malls. The admiral of the cargo fleet even joked about providing a Burger King. Whatever the hell that was,